If you're thinking of buying a 2026 GM truck, stop, because the engines are failing way earlier than you can imagine. And I'm not talking about eventually. I'm talking about trucks with tiny mileage numbers that should still be boring to own. Instead, owners describe the same spiral: odd noise, sudden loss of power, then a no start that ends in a tow. Dealers can confirm the damage, but the bigger issue is repetition. When the same failure keeps appearing, the risk isn't personal, it's systemic. And the most unsettling part? Some fixed trucks don't stay fixed. That's why this story matters. Here's what the pattern suggests. When brand new stops meaning safe. Brand new is supposed to mean safe, predictable, and boring. It means the hard miles have not happened yet. The warning lights should stay dark, and the driver should still be learning the buttons. That assumption shattered when vehicles with only a few thousand miles began losing engines without warning. Drivers describe sudden knocking, grinding, and then silence. No long buildup, no slow decline. One moment normal driving, the next moment the vehicle cannot move under its own power. Early failure carries a different weight than high mileage breakdowns. Wear takes time. Fatigue follows use. When an engine fails this early, it violates the basic promise of modern manufacturing. These vehicles are not reaching their first service intervals. They are not towing heavy loads for years. They are not approaching the end of anything. They are still new enough to smell new, yet old enough to strand owners on ordinary roads. What makes this moment feel different is speed and proximity. Failures are happening close to purchase, close to delivery, close to the first sense of ownership pride. There is no buffer of time to soften the blow. The collapse happens before trust has even settled in, turning excitement into disbelief almost overnight. That shock spreads quickly, because early breakdowns collapse confidence faster than any statistic or rumor ever could for ordinary buyers. And the unsettling part? These failures aren't random. The pattern nobody wanted to see. At first glance, each failure looks isolated, a single report lost in the noise of ownership complaints. Patterns only emerge when incidents are stacked side by side. Mileage clusters appear first. Engines fail within narrow bands, often before routine maintenance milestones. Model lines differ, trims vary, yet the mechanical end is the same. When repetition shows up across families, coincidence stops being a useful explanation. The number of reports matters less than their alignment. A handful of identical failures tells a clearer story than hundreds of unrelated ones. Similar sounds, similar shutdowns, similar timelines. The consistency is what draws attention. It suggests a shared vulnerability rather than individual misuse or chance damage. What makes these patterns harder to ignore is where they surface. They do not begin in service bays or internal memos. They appear in public complaint databases, owner forums, and independent trackers that aggregate reports without filters. These platforms capture raw experience before it is sorted, categorized, or normalized. By the time dealerships see one case, the pattern already exists elsewhere, visible to anyone looking broadly enough. Charts, timelines, and shared documentation turn anecdotes into signals, revealing repetition that individual owners could never detect alone, regardless of location, driving style, or vehicle price point, across different regions, climates, purchase dates, and ownership contexts simultaneously, without coordination or prompting from manufacturers. Once patterns appear, someone is forced to pay attention. If this information matters to you, support the work by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your experience below. When the government starts asking questions, attention does not arrive at the first complaint. It arrives when thresholds are crossed. Investigations begin quietly, triggered by volume, severity, and risk. Sudden loss of power at speed carries different weight than inconvenience. When reports describe engines seizing without warning, the issue moves from dissatisfaction to safety concern. What separates this situation from routine noise is concentration. Failures cluster tightly in time and mileage, suggesting exposure rather than aging. The complaints are specific, repeatable, and technically consistent. That combination narrows the margin for dismissal. Regulators look for patterns that imply a shared defect, capable of creating hazardous conditions on public roads. Another signal is persistence. When reports continue after initial scrutiny, the issue resists normalization. Investigators track whether incidents taper off or accelerate. In this case, the flow does not slow, it sustains. That continuity pushes the matter beyond internal handling, and into formal oversight channels designed for systemic risk. Such escalation reflects predefined criteria rather than emotion, relying on exposure metrics, incident similarity, and potential harm calculations established long before any specific brand enters review. Those frameworks exist to detect safety threats early, even when consequences remain statistically small, because severity matters more than frequency during normal driving conditions nationwide, without requiring intent, blame, or prior recall histories to justify intervention thresholds at all under federal motor safety law. And once scrutiny begins, manufacturers have only one move: GM's official response path. Once attention reaches that level, responses narrow. Large manufacturers follow predefined response paths shaped by scale and exposure. Decisions must balance speed, clarity, and continuity of sales. Actions are chosen not in isolation, but against inventory already built, vehicles already delivered, and orders already placed. The structure of a response reflects constraints more than confidence. Any action must account for production schedules, dealership networks, and public communication limits. Timing matters. Acting too broadly risks freezing sales. Acting too narrowly risks appearing dismissive. The chosen path attempts to contain disruption while signaling control. This logic explains why responses often emphasize inspection, classification, and staged remedies, rather than immediate sweeping action. The goal is to isolate affected units without destabilizing the entire lineup. It is a controlled approach, designed to preserve movement while addressing identified risk bands. Internal coordination also shapes messaging, requiring alignment across engineering, legal, and retail operations simultaneously. Each group operates under different pressures, deadlines, and risk tolerances, slowing decisive movement even when urgency feels obvious from the outside. Documentation requirements, supplier availability, and market timing constraints further narrow options, forcing responses that appear cautious yet remain consistent with internal governance expectations and contractual obligations already in place across regions. These realities define the response path, regardless of public perception, commentary, or mounting external pressure at the moment of execution across the industry landscape. But real life doesn't happen on paper. The moment the fix meets the road. On paper, the fix looked orderly. Inspections were completed, parts were evaluated, and vehicles were cleared to return to daily use. Once those vehicles re-entered real traffic, a new category of data appeared. Engines that had been examined and released began failing again, often within short driving windows. These were no longer pre-fix incidents. They occurred after corrective action, which placed them in a separate mechanical class entirely. Post-fix failures matter because they remove uncertainty about prior condition. Components had been reviewed, fluids had been updated, clearances had been checked. When an engine fails after that process, it suggests the underlying issue was not isolated to the elements addressed. It also eliminates driver behavior and neglect as variables, because the mechanical baseline had just been reset. Inside the system, this is the moment confidence changes shape. Quiet assumptions that failures would taper off did not hold. Engineering teams began tracking recurrence rates instead of initial incidents. Service data no longer showed decline. It showed persistence. That shift does not create panic, but it does alter internal expectations. When fixes fail to end failures, attention turns away from field execution and toward deeper structural continuity within the hardware itself. Something more troubling surfaced shortly after. Why replacement engines didn't save anyone. Engine replacement is normally a clean break. The assumption is simple: remove the failed unit, install a fresh one, reset the clock. In this case, that reset did not behave as expected. Replacement engines began showing similar symptoms, sometimes within similarly low mileage ranges. That outcome reframed the problem entirely. The reason lies in manufacturing continuity. Replacement engines are not designed in isolation. They are built using the same tooling, suppliers, tolerances, and assembly logic as the originals. If a systemic vulnerability exists upstream, Swapping units does not remove exposure. It simply restarts the process from the same conditions. A new engine, in this context, did not mean a new risk profile. It meant re-entry into the same production ecosystem. Components flowed from the same channels. Quality checks followed the same thresholds. The mechanical DNA remained consistent. Replacement reduced immediate downtime, but did not sever the connection to the original failure pathway. Once this became clear, internally, the problem shifted from field remediation to production reality. Fixing individual vehicles no longer promised resolution if the supply stream itself carried the same characteristics forward. That realization forced a re-evaluation of assumptions that replacement alone could stabilize outcomes. That discovery changed everything behind the scenes. The dealer system hits its limits. As failures persisted, the dealer network absorbed the strain first. Service bays filled with vehicles awaiting diagnostics, parts, or authorization. Standard turnaround timelines stretched. Technicians faced repeating symptoms without definitive resolution tools. Diagnostic procedures confirmed failure, but could not always explain cause beyond component loss. Blind spots emerged. Diagnostic software identifies outcomes, not origins. When multiple potential sources lead to similar failure signatures, technicians reach procedural limits quickly. Escalation paths exist, but they depend on engineering guidance that takes time to develop. Meanwhile, vehicles remain stationary. This creates tension between dealerships and manufacturers. Dealers operate on throughput and customer flow. Manufacturers operate on validation and control. When failures repeat without a definitive fix, those priorities collide. Authorization delays increase. Parts availability tightens. Temporary solutions become permanent backlogs. None of this is emotional. It is operational friction. Systems designed for occasional defects struggle under sustained recurrence. Each additional unit compounds the load. The dealer network becomes a pressure indicator, revealing where assumptions about scale no longer hold true under real-world volume and repetition. At that point, cost stopped being theoretical. When warranty math turns dangerous, warranty exposure grows quietly until it does not. Each replacement engine carries a known cost. Each labor hour is logged. Each vehicle occupies space and time. Individually, these numbers fit expected models. Collectively, they begin to bend them. Replacement frequency alters projections first. When rates exceed modeled assumptions, financial buffers erode. Parts availability becomes a constraint, not an inconvenience. Supply chains built for steady flow must respond to spikes they were not designed to handle. Inventory that once moved predictably now bottlenecks at specific components. Cost per vehicle matters more than total volume. A single high-cost failure reshapes margins differently than many minor ones. When engines require full replacement instead of repair, exposure multiplies. Transportation, labor, storage, and administrative overhead stack quickly. None of these costs are optional once the process begins. As these numbers accumulate, they influence decision-making beyond service departments. Financial models adjust. Forecasts change. What began as a mechanical issue becomes an accounting gravity well, pulling attention from multiple divisions simultaneously. The math does not argue. It simply grows. When obligations reach that scale, attention shifts outward. The buyer mood shift. Something shifted the moment buyers realized reliability was no longer a given. Orders that once felt automatic became negotiable, then questionable, then canceled outright. People who had planned purchases months in advance began pausing, recalculating, and walking away. The decision was rarely loud. It happened quietly at kitchen tables, in financing offices, and on late-night searches, comparing alternatives. The product itself had not changed visually, but the emotional contract had cracked. Buying logic adjusted almost overnight. Shoppers who once prioritized brand history began prioritizing risk avoidance. Warranty length mattered more than horsepower. Lease terms mattered more than loyalty. Some delayed purchases entirely, choosing to wait rather than commit during uncertainty. Others shifted segments, downsizing or switching categories to reduce exposure. The calculus moved from desire to defense, from aspiration to caution. Fear replaced familiarity. Long-standing brand trust, built over decades, collapsed in weeks when stories circulated faster than reassurance. The idea of being stranded inconvenienced, or financially trapped outweighed past satisfaction. Even buyers without direct exposure absorbed the anxiety through peers, forums, and shared experience. Trust does not require personal loss to evaporate. It only requires believable risk. Group chats formed, timelines were shared, and private conversations slowly turned into collective awareness across regions, income levels, and age groups without any formal leadership or instruction guiding the shift at the same time. What looked like hesitation soon became coordination, how legal action took shape. Accountability entered the conversation the moment frustration hardened into intent. Legal action does not begin with courtrooms. It begins with language. Words used in official notices, service documents, and public statements define obligations and limits. When owners compared phrasing, similarities mattered. Precision mattered. What was described as inspection versus repair carried consequences that extended far beyond the service visit. Cases formed around structure, not outrage. Plaintiffs grouped by model years, ownership timelines, and exposure rather than emotion. Claims focused on expectations set at purchase and assurances made afterward. The argument was not about inconvenience, but about promises. If a remedy is described narrowly, responsibility narrows with it. If assurances are broad, liability expands. What plaintiffs are claiming is consistency between message and outcome. They are not asking courts to design fixes or predict engineering futures. They are asserting that commitments were made and reliance followed. Documentation, not opinion, anchors these cases. Receipts, timelines, and written representations replace anecdote. That shift also changed who spoke first, how quickly coordination happened, and which firms paid attention. Legal forums replaced comment threads, and private consultations replaced public venting, creating quieter momentum that moved steadily without spectacle, hashtags, or viral moments, driving awareness while timelines aligned across regions and filings multiplied through shared counsel and synchronized strategies, without drawing public attention or media headlines nationally. The move from complaint to claim marked a new phase. If you want to stay ahead of stories like this as they develop, subscribe now. These issues don't resolve overnight, and the next update could change how you think about buying, owning, or trusting what comes next. Market punishment arrives. Market punishment rarely announces itself. It arrives through pricing, hesitation, and silence. Resale values softened first, not collapsing but bending downward as uncertainty priced itself in. Vehicles associated with risk require larger incentives to move, and those incentives linger. The effect compounds quietly, reshaping expectations long before headlines catch up. Leasing absorbed pressure next. Residual values depend on confidence in longevity, and uncertainty erodes that foundation. Higher perceived risk forces, conservative assumptions, raising monthly costs or shortening terms. Some programs paused altogether, waiting for clarity that did not immediately arrive. Leasing, once a hedge against ownership risk, became a mirror reflecting it. Fleet buyers adjusted with discipline. Large purchasers operate on spreadsheets, not sentiment. When reliability questions appear, acquisition slows. Orders are deferred. Trial units expand while commitments shrink. Fleet hesitation matters because of volume. A small pullback at scale removes thousands of vehicles from projected demand without drama or public statements. Financing followed similar patterns as lenders adjusted terms to reflect perceived exposure. Interest rates, approval thresholds, and required down payments shifted subtly, changing affordability calculations. None of these moves required announcements. They functioned as automatic responses within risk models, transmitting concern through numbers rather than language over time as confidence weakened and assumptions were rewritten across multiple institutions simultaneously, without coordination or shared intent, reflecting systemic caution rather than panic emerging quietly. These shifts signaled consequences beyond individual buyers, how competitors quietly capitalized. Competitors did not celebrate publicly, they adjusted privately. Dealer conversations shifted tone as alternatives were presented more confidently. Sales staff emphasized availability, stability, and predictability without naming rivals. Silence became the message. By saying less, competitors allowed uncertainty to do the work for them. Marketing, repositioning followed the same logic. Campaigns leaned into reliability language, ownership piece, and long-term confidence. The absence of direct comparison was deliberate. Letting consumers draw their own conclusions preserved distance while capturing attention. Strategic restraint avoided backlash while still redirecting demand. At the dealer level, incentives were tuned carefully. Trade and offers improved. Inventory was highlighted where confidence was strongest. None of this required coordination at the industry level. It emerged naturally as retailers responded to buyer hesitation and shifting priorities. Waiting allowed competitors to benefit without exposure. As uncertainty lingered, comparison shopping increased, and alternatives gained consideration they might not have earned otherwise. Extended decision cycles favored brands perceived as safe harbors. Over time, quiet consistency became a competitive advantage, requiring no confrontation and no claims. This approach protected reputations, avoided scrutiny, and converted hesitation into opportunity while maintaining plausible neutrality throughout the buying process until momentum shifted and demand redistributed without any public confrontation or escalation, leaving outcomes visible only through sales data over time as markets quietly adjusted expectations across regions and segments simultaneously without announcement signals. The most effective move was patience. Regulatory fallout. Beyond GM, regulatory systems are designed to learn, and moments like this become reference points. Oversight pressure does not target a single company for long. It expands outward, asking what signals were missed and why thresholds were reached only after exposure grew. Regulators review how data flows, how early warnings surface, and how quickly responses align with real-world outcomes. Each review reshapes future expectations. Recall, reform conversations follow naturally when remedies fail to resolve risk fully. Attention shifts toward whether existing frameworks remain sufficient under real-world conditions. Regulators examine how corrective actions are defined, verified, documented, and formally closed. The objective is not punishment, but prevention through earlier detection and stronger validation. Refinements emphasize transparency, independent verification, and sustained post-remedy monitoring. Fixes must perform outside controlled environments, not just during inspections. Over time, these adjustments reshape expectations, raise thresholds for closure, and strengthen oversight systems, so future responses rely less on assumption and more on continuously observed performance across complex regulatory environments. What regulators learn in these moments becomes policy memory. Procedures evolve quietly, tightening standards and redefining acceptable margins. Future investigations benefit from sharper criteria shaped by prior experience. While the public sees a single event, oversight institutions absorb lessons that influence decisions across industries and years. These lessons rarely make headlines, yet they alter the regulatory landscape in lasting ways, shaping how safety, accountability, and verification intersect long after the immediate spotlight fades and attention shifts elsewhere across the automotive sector and beyond. The effects do not stop at paperwork. Manufacturing floors felt it next. Labor and production strain. Inside production environments, pressure accumulates long before output changes. Workforce stress increases when scrutiny rises. Inspections intensify. Documentation multiplies. Each additional checkpoint slows momentum. Workers are asked to maintain pace while absorbing new procedures, a balance that strains even experienced teams. Production pacing becomes a negotiation rather than a constant. Slowing down protects quality but threatens volume targets. Speeding up preserves supply but risks compounding issues. That tension forces managers to make trade-offs daily, often without perfect information. The push and pull between throughput and precision becomes more visible when tolerance for error shrinks. Quality versus volume is not an abstract debate. It determines overtime hours, shift extensions, and fatigue. It influences morale as workers navigate expectations that feel misaligned. Sustained pressure without resolution can erode confidence internally, even when jobs remain secure. Over time, these dynamics reshape production culture, emphasizing caution where speed once dominated. Such strain is not confined to one facility. It spreads across supplier networks and logistics chains as upstream and downstream partners adjust to altered rhythms. Manufacturing grows more deliberate, less forgiving, and increasingly cautious under heightened oversight and accumulated risk. Processes slow, documentation thickens, and tolerance for deviation shrinks. These adjustments ripple outward, changing timelines, costs, and expectations far beyond factory walls. What begins as internal pressure becomes an external signal. Beyond domestic operations, perception shifts quickly. Outside the country, confidence recalibrates as observers interpret disruption through distance, delay, and uncertainty, reshaping assumptions long before official assurances arrive globally today. Global confidence in American trucks. Global markets respond to reputation faster than reassurance. American trucks have long carried an image of durability and strength. When questions arise, international buyers reassess assumptions they rarely revisit. Export perception shifts subtly, influenced by headlines, trade conversations, and distributor feedback. International buyers prioritize predictability. They factor service access, parts availability, and long-term support into purchase decisions. When uncertainty enters those calculations, alternatives gain attention. Trust built over decades can soften even without direct experience because global buyers rely heavily on signal interpretation rather than personal trial. Long-term brand trust is cumulative. It forms through consistency rather than claims. Once challenged, rebuilding it requires time and visible stability. Global confidence does not collapse overnight, but it does recalibrate. Expectations adjust downward until proven otherwise. Competitors in other regions capitalize quietly, emphasizing their own reliability narratives, while American brands work to restore equilibrium. These shifts influence trade volumes, dealer investments, and partnership strategies abroad. They do not reverse quickly. Instead, they settle into assumptions that guide purchasing behavior for years. Global markets remember disruption longer than domestic audiences because risk tolerance drops when distance magnifies uncertainty, and solutions feel slower from the outside. Over time, perception hardens into expectation, and expectation shapes demand. Eventually, the ripple contracts from institutions to people. The conversation stops being about markets or brands and becomes personal. Decisions feel heavier, consequences feel closer, and choice becomes cautious. That narrowing leaves the buyer standing alone, weighing risk directly alone. What reliability means now? Reliability no longer means what it once did. For many buyers, it used to imply confidence by default, earned through brand history and familiarity. That assumption has eroded. Reliability is now evaluated actively, not inherited. Buyers question claims, compare timelines, and weigh worst-case scenarios before committing. Risk tolerance has tightened. Ownership decisions incorporate exit strategies from the beginning. Leasing, extended coverage, and shorter ownership cycles gain appeal as hedges against uncertainty. Some buyers accept higher upfront costs to reduce long-term exposure. Others delay entirely, choosing to wait rather than gamble. The emotional component of purchasing has shifted from pride to caution. The end of blind brand trust does not mean the end of brands. It means accountability has moved closer to the moment of decision. Buyers feel responsible for due diligence that was once optional. Forums, databases, and shared experiences now influence confidence more than slogans. This redefinition leaves room for rebuilding, but never on old terms. Trust now must be earned continuously, measured by action rather than reputation. The future buyer is informed, skeptical, and far less forgiving when promises diverge from outcomes. What emerges is not cynicism, but awareness. Ownership becomes deliberate instead of emotional. Decisions slow down. Questions multiply. Transparency outweighs tradition. And consistency matters more than reassurance. Reliability is no longer a slogan, it is a record. That shift is quietly reshaping how vehicles are evaluated, purchased, financed, and kept, altering expectations across the market in ways still unfolding over time globally. Before you go drop a comment with your truck year, engine, mileage, and exactly what happened. The more details you share, the faster we can spot the real pattern. If this saved you time or money, hit like so more owners see it, and subscribe, because this story isn't over. New reports, dealer updates, and the next twist are already coming.